Jason, 46 years old, married Darlene, 45, 2 years ago. Their relationship has been one of the best things that ever happened to him, but getting to this point was far from easy, particularly for Darlene. She had just left a 15-year-long emotionally abusive marriage with her ex-husband, Tom. From the very beginning, it was clear to Jason that Tom was the epitome of a toxic partner, someone who had left Darlene emotionally battered even though he hadn't laid a hand on her. Darlene would often talk about the things Tom did to undermine her self-worth. She once told Jason about an incident at a dinner party they attended together. Darlene was telling a story about work, something simple and harmless, but in the middle of it, Tom interrupted her, loudly laughing and saying, "Oh, Darlene is so important at her job. If she didn't show up, no one would get their coffee." The comment was supposed to be a joke, but everyone at the party could tell it was designed to humiliate her. Darlene told Jason she wished she could disappear that night. It was only one example of how Tom would tear her down in front of others, making her feel small and worthless. But the public humiliation was just the surface of Tom's abuse. In private, he was controlling to the point of obsession. He was constantly paranoid, accusing Darlene of cheating on him over the smallest interactions. If she spoke to another man, even if it was just the cashier at the grocery store, Tom would lose his temper, demanding to know who she was talking to and why. There was a time when her car broke down on her way home from work. Instead of expressing concern when she called to tell him she'd be late, Tom immediately jumped to accusations, asking her where she really was and who she was with. The gaslighting was relentless. Every time Darlene tried to confront him about his behavior, Tom would flip the situation and make her feel like she was in the wrong. He'd tell her she was too sensitive, that she was imagining things, twisting every scenario to make himself look like the victim. Once, she caught him having lunch with another woman. When she brought it up, instead of admitting anything, Tom turned it around, calling her paranoid and insecure. Even with clear evidence, Darlene ended up apologizing to him, convinced by his manipulation that she had overreacted. The emotional abuse was so insidious that Darlene believed she had no other options. Tom had spent years breaking her down, telling her things like, "You'll never find anyone better than me," or "No one else will want you after all these years." He made her feel trapped, as though she was worthless and incapable of finding happiness elsewhere. Even though she was strong, Darlene had tried to leave several times, but Tom's words always brought her back, making her question her own strength. Jason met Darlene while she was still married to Tom. They were part of the same local walking group, and their paths crossed regularly during these walks. Over time, they struck up a friendship. Darlene was one of those people who could make anyone feel at ease. She was warm, kind, and easy to talk to. Their conversations ranged from light-hearted topics, like favorite movies, to deeper, more personal matters. Darlene gradually opened up about her life, and Jason found himself caring for her more than he had anticipated. He admired her resilience but was heartbroken by the pain she was going through. Of course, Tom wasn't happy about their friendship. His jealousy was palpable. Whenever Darlene spent time with Jason, Tom would fly into a rage. Darlene would go silent for days at a time, not responding to Jason's texts or showing up to the walking group. At first, Jason was confused and a little hurt, but soon Darlene explained that Tom was accusing her of having feelings for him, which at that point wasn't true, they were just friends. But in Tom's twisted mind, any man who gave Darlene attention was a threat. One particular memory sticks out in Jason's mind. After one of their walks, he and Darlene stopped by a cafe for coffee, just chatting about the weather and making small talk. It was completely innocent, but unfortunately, someone who knew Tom saw them and mentioned it to him. Darlene disappeared from Jason's life for nearly a month after that. When she finally resurfaced, she told Jason how Tom had gone ballistic, accusing her of cheating and demanding she stop talking to him entirely. In his fit of control, Tom even took her car keys, ensuring she couldn't go anywhere without his permission. Every time she pulled away from Jason, Darlene would apologize, telling him, "I'm sorry, I just can't handle the drama at home right now." It was clear to Jason that she was doing everything she could to avoid conflict, but it crushed him to see her trapped in this toxic situation. The more Jason learned about Tom, the more protective he felt over Darlene. She didn't deserve any of it. Darlene was the kind of person who went out of her way to make sure others were okay, even when she was suffering. It broke Jason's heart to see her pulled away from the things she loved, isolated because of Tom's insecurities and controlling behavior. Eventually, Darlene started opening up more about what life was really like with Tom. She described how he'd constantly criticize her, her looks, her cooking, her job. Nothing she did was ever good enough for him, and over the years, he had chipped away at her self-esteem. The final breaking point came after something as small as oversalting a dish. Darlene had been rushing to get dinner on the table after a long day, and in her hurry, she added too much salt. It wasn't a big deal, but Tom lost his temper, yelling at her, calling her names, and making her feel like she was the worst wife in the world. But that night, something inside Darlene snapped. She didn't argue back or try to defend herself like she usually did. She just sat there, quiet, and in that silence, she realized she couldn't live like that anymore. The next day, while Tom was at work, Darlene packed her things and left. She didn't know where else to go, so she went to Jason. When she showed up at his door, she looked exhausted, like she hadn't slept in weeks. Jason didn't hesitate. He took her in without a second thought. The following months were incredibly tough. Darlene was going through a painful divorce, and Jason had never seen anyone so worn down by life. She was a shell of herself, but at the same time, there was a determination in her that kept her going. She knew she deserved better than the life Tom had forced her into, and she was ready to fight for it. With Jason by her side, Darlene slowly began to rebuild her life. It was hard for Darlene to face each day, knowing that her life was in complete upheaval. Some mornings she woke up thinking, maybe today will be different. But every time, the weight of her situation reminded her that this was no temporary storm, this was her life now. The divorce with Tom was anything but straightforward. Tom seemed to relish in dragging it out as long as he possibly could, as though he was convinced that if he just made it hard enough, she'd change her mind and come back to him. He wasn't doing it out of love, though. Darlene knew that much. This was about control. Tom had always needed to be in control, and the idea of her leaving was an affront to the world he'd carefully crafted. Darlene wasn't backing down, no matter how much it tore her apart inside. She knew leaving Tom was the right decision, even if it felt like the world was falling apart around her. But it wasn't just the divorce that weighed her down. She was also trying to repair the fractured relationship with her daughter, Linda. Linda, now 20, had been only 15 when Darlene left, and the divide between them had only grown deeper since then. Linda had always been closer to Tom. It wasn't that Darlene didn't love her daughter, she did, deeply, but Linda had idolized her father, seeing him through rose-colored glasses that obscured the reality Darlene had lived through. Darlene couldn't forget the many nights Linda would call, crying, unable to comprehend why her mother had left. To Linda, the family had seemed fine, perfect even. She couldn't understand that her mother had been in an abusive marriage for years, a reality hidden from her by the facade Tom so expertly maintained. Darlene could still see the pain in Linda's eyes during those phone calls, her voice trembling with a sense of betrayal. To Linda, Darlene had ripped their family apart without warning. The guilt weighed heavily on Darlene's shoulders. She hated the thought of Linda suffering, especially when she couldn't see the full picture. One night, Darlene sat at my kitchen table, her phone still in her hand, her face streaked with tears. She had just gotten off another heart-wrenching call with Linda, who had once again begged her mother to come home, to return to the life they had known before. Linda didn't understand, and how could she? Tom had never let his true nature show around her. He was always the doting, affectionate father when Linda was around, masking the cruelty that surfaced behind closed doors. Darlene had tried to explain, tried to make Linda see why she had to leave, but it was hard for a 15-year-old to grasp the complexities of an abusive relationship. Through all of this, I did what I could to support Darlene, though it was clear she was struggling in ways I couldn't fully comprehend. She felt trapped between two impossible choices, trying to protect herself while also worrying endlessly about Linda. And Tom wasn't helping matters. He had been manipulating Linda, feeding her lies, trying to make Darlene the villain in all of this. He'd say things like, "Your mom doesn't care about us anymore," or "She left because she wanted to be with someone else," even though none of it was true. But Linda, confused and young, didn't know what to believe. In her eyes, her mother had abandoned her. To Linda, I wasn't innocent in all of this either. She had always harbored a deep resentment toward me, even before Darlene and I started dating. In her mind, I was part of the reason her family had fallen apart. It didn't matter that I had been there for Darlene during some of the darkest moments of her life. To Linda, I was just the man who came between her parents, the one who ruined everything. When Darlene and I made our relationship official about a year ago, Linda's hostility only grew. Darlene and I had known each other for years, and making our relationship public felt natural. We married quickly, within a few months. Some people thought it was too soon, but for us, it felt right. We were happy, truly happy, for the first time in a long time. But Linda wasn't part of that happiness. She refused to attend our wedding, which devastated Darlene. I could see the pain in her eyes, but she tried to downplay it, telling me that Linda just needed time to adjust. I hoped too that, in time, Linda would come around once she saw how much happier her mother was, but she kept her distance, barely speaking to us unless it was absolutely necessary. Things took an unexpected turn when, a year ago, Darlene lost her job. It happened suddenly, her company went under, and just like that, she was out of work. Darlene's income had been crucial, especially because she had been helping Linda with rent. But with no job, she couldn't continue supporting Linda, which meant that Linda had no choice but to move in with us. The tension in the house was unbearable from the moment Linda walked through the door. She didn't want to be there, and it showed. She blamed me for everything, her father's pain, her mother's absence, and now her own predicament. I tried to keep things cordial, even giving her space to settle in, but nothing I did made any difference. Linda avoided me like I was some sort of disease. If I walked into the room, she would either leave immediately or sit in stony silence, glued to her phone. My birthday was last week, and honestly, I wasn't expecting much. At my age, birthdays aren't usually a big deal, but I've always enjoyed them. A small celebration with the people I care about is more than enough for me. I was looking forward to a quiet evening with Darlene and a few friends. I certainly wasn't expecting anything from Linda. Given how strained things were between us, I figured she would either ignore the day or stay out of sight. But after I cut the cake and was sitting with Darlene and a couple of close friends, Linda walked into the room. Her expression was hard to read, somewhere between determined and distant, and she was holding a small card. For a split second, I thought this might be the moment things would start to change. Maybe this was Linda's way of making peace, of starting fresh. She handed me the card, and Darlene looked as shocked as I felt. For the first time in a long time, there was hope in the air. I smiled at Linda, trying to show her how much the gesture meant to me. But when I opened the card, my heart sank. Instead of a kind message, or even just a simple happy birthday, the words inside said, "I hate you for marrying my mother, and I hope you die." I stared at the card, unable to process what I was seeing. It felt like a physical blow, like every ounce of progress I thought we had made had been an illusion. The room went silent, the festive atmosphere completely shattered. My friends, who had been laughing just moments before, now looked painfully uncomfortable. Darlene was devastated. I could see the hurt in her eyes as she realized just how much Linda's words had wounded me. She reached for the card, as if taking it from me could somehow undo the damage, but it was too late. I excused myself, retreating to my room where I stayed for the rest of the evening. I couldn't face anyone after that. What was supposed to be a happy, light-hearted day had turned into one of the most humiliating experiences of my life. As I sat there, replaying the events in my mind, I realized something needed to change. I couldn't continue living like this, constantly on edge in my own home, walking on eggshells around Linda. After the guests left, I went to Darlene and told her that it was time for Linda to move out. I couldn't take the disrespect any longer. It was a difficult conversation, and I could see the pain in Darlene's face. She loved her daughter deeply, and the thought of asking Linda to leave was tearing her apart. But to my surprise, she agreed with me. She knew things couldn't continue like this. That same evening, we sat Linda down and told her she had a month to find a new place. At first, Linda seemed confused, but when the reality of the situation hit her, she exploded. She screamed at Darlene, accusing her of choosing me over her own child, of being a terrible mother. It was brutal, watching Darlene's face crumble under the weight of her daughter's anger. But we both knew this had to happen, no matter how painful it was. As if the situation couldn't get any worse, the story of what happened on my birthday spread throughout our small town. Everyone knew about the card, about the fallout between Linda and me. People started giving Linda side-eye when they saw her around town, and it wasn't long before the tension followed her to work. She worked at a local diner where tips were a big part of her income, but after the rumors spread, she started getting fewer customers, and when people did tip, it was next to nothing. It was like the whole town had silently taken my side, shunning Linda for what she had done. A week later, Linda surprised me again. She came into the living room where I was watching TV and, without preamble, apologized. She admitted that she had been out of line, that the card on my birthday had been wrong. She looked like a different person. Gone was the anger and resentment, replaced by someone who seemed lost and scared.